had said that they retained records that far back. And at this point in time, it was only, 5 or 6 years earlier. It wasn't, 10 years like it is now. And that they didn't retain any records at all. And George gave them numerous chances. He said, "Are you sure you have no record of Bob Lazar?" He asked Kirk Meyer, "Are you sure you have no record of Bob Lazar?" Mm-hmm. They denied. And then that's when Bob came up with the Los Alamos phone book with his name and station number in there, and then also he had a copy of the Los Alamos newspaper from 1982.
And how did they react to that?
Well,
we're also talking about two people. When I was initially hired on, I was hired on via a headhunter, essentially, for Los Alamos.
Sure.
And I worked, like I said, the initial time you work for anyone in a secure job, you have that time before your clearance goes through, and that's when I worked for Kirk Meyer, and then later became hired on directly at Los Alamos. However, both people, either quote-unquote lost their records or just flatly denied the existence of me even working there.
Well, what pushed you to go public?
What pushed me to go public essentially was fear.
Fear of what? Fear of death, fear of prosecution, fear of
Well, just fear in general. I imagine you can add them all together, and that was essentially what I was feeling at the time. At that time, I had nothing other than what I had said to anybody. For the most part, if I suddenly disappeared off the face of the earth,
nobody would have noticed.
Well, not only would nobody would have noticed, I certainly have friends and family that would miss me, but no one would have known exactly what happened. And
people disappear all the time.
Right.
Well, especially in Las Vegas. So I at least wanted to get what was going on out in the open. And I believe it worked very well. It was essentially a pushback against all the force that was leaning on me. Where if I thought if I just went on in a subdued fashion on television and maybe just said a little bit, and just kind of gave a little shove back, they would lay off. And it was a big gamble, but it worked exactly the way I wanted it to.
Also, Art, at this point, when he was trying to show those around him what was going on, is when he took people like me and his wife and John Lear out to the BLM land outside of Area 51, and we actually saw one of the discs tested in the sky. Now, Bob did this after he told us the story. After he was in trouble and in fear for his life, he told those around him the story, and obviously we were a little apprehensive when a friend said, we thought he was just working in some project for the government. None of us really cared what he was doing. And, so he wanted to prove that, not that we thought he was lying, but it's still an outrageous story to tell your wife and friends and say, oh, by the way, I'm working on flying saucers.
Sure, and John has told me the story of the trip up to Area 51, and there is video to support your claim as well.
Right.
Plenty of video. Now, they didn't let you go, though, because in 1990, and a lot of people use this, Bob, to try to discredit you, you had to plead guilty to a pandering charge related to the apparent operation of an illegal brothel in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a pandering charge, that's very serious.
Actually, I got to pick the charge.
Oh, you got to pick it?
Yeah, I got to pick the charge from three of them.
Now, my understanding is a little vague, but I think all you did was some computer work, isn't that right?
Well, what I literally did, we have to, backtrack to years ago. After I left Los Alamos and opened up 1-hour photo business for my wife in Los Alamos, we had decided to move. And we began, because of our contract with Los Alamos, began to amass quite a bit of money. We were looking for a business to buy into. One of the things we invested in was one of the legal brothels in northern Nevada. A very weird...
in northern Nevada? No kidding.
Right. Well, this was years ago.
Yeah, people need to know, here in my county of Nye, we have legal brothels, and near Reno they have legal brothels as well.
Right, which is up where this was.
Okay.
And it was just another business, just an investment opportunity, and we had made money off of it and later got rid of it. However, an amazing coincidence. After all this had happened, after I left the lab and we decided to move to Nevada, which is essentially what brought me to Las Vegas here. I had businesses in Southern California, in Northern Nevada, and in New Mexico, and I needed a central hub, and that's the only reason I moved out to Las Vegas.
Sure.
So essentially you knew the brothel business at that point.
Well, yeah, to some extent. And even though we were out of it, after I had left S4 and began to look for some other source of income, I ran into one of the old managers of the place up north.
Right.
And she said she had a place running down here that wasn't running illegally, but she'd wondered if I could install a computer system like we had up there to make her business run smoother. And I said, there's no problem. It'll take me a while to write the program, and I can set the computers up for you, and so on and so forth. They also wanted a security camera outside to make sure a guy wasn't coming to the door with a gun or a knife. So
sure.
I essentially installed all that stuff and left, and that was that was the end of it. However,
only it wasn't the end of it.
No, it wasn't the end of it, and certainly it was pretty. It's
actually, Art, what happened after that is, as you well know, living here in Southern Nevada, that when George Knapp did his special UFOs the Best Evidence in November of '89, George won an Emmy for it, and it was one of the highest rated shows in the history of Southern Nevada. So when it came for Sweeps Week the next spring, George said it would be a great idea to have Bob Lazar on, so Bob had a giant following, and say, what has Bob Lazar been up to? So Bob goes on television, not knowing that installing all of this equipment for a brothel was illegal, and on television, George says, what have you been up to, Bob? And Bob says, oh, I installed some security systems and computers and things for a local brothel.
And then
needless to say, the police were listening that day, too.
Apparently so. All right, gentlemen, hold on. We've only got one more hour to go, and it sounds like the coffee's working. This is Coast to Coast. Back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Bob, here's a really good question for you. I guess we ought to finish up. So, you got arrested after being on television with George Knapp.
Well, not really arrested. They said just come down and talk to us. But essentially that was the impetus of everything. Was talking on the
TV.
Art, there's a big, long, drawn-out story behind it, which we probably don't have time to go into.
All right.
Essentially, the madam of the brothel was an informant for the FBI, DEA,
yep.
And anyway, she got off. She was a prostitute who ran the whole brothel, and she got off with a misdemeanor from an old early 1900s Nevada statute called keeping a disorderly house. And they had to nail somebody, and Bob just went down and turned himself in, and they gave him probation, and that was it. So.
I see. Well, a lot of people...
But even the judge thought it was very strange that the FBI was at the trial. And I think he made some very unusual comments, too, knowing that there was some other influence.
Yeah. The judge said on camera in court that he didn't understand why the madam of this brothel got off with a misdemeanor, and considering that Bob Lazar was certainly not a panderer in the classic sense of the term and had no prior criminal record, why in the world he would have pled guilty to pandering. Yet it was some bad legal advice. And
we can all turn our imaginations loose on that one.
Yeah,
it's not real.
And
hard.
Actually, they gave him probation, and the people of the probation department used to fight to try and get to come do the checks on Bob so they could speak to Bob Lazar, the UFO guy.
All right, I want to run you through a few fast questions. I've got a million faxes. One is a good one. How could some of the UFOs or parts be disassembled if they, in essence, had no seams?
They were absolutely torn out of the craft. When I had corrected myself and said that one of the gravity amplifiers was removed from the sport model itself. It wasn't removed surgically like you would imagine. It looked like it was almost cut off with an oxyacetylene torch, though there were no burn marks on the deck. But it was absolutely ripped out. Now, I never did see where the other amplifier to that craft went, or heard any stories about it. But
maybe it was the one on the workbench.
All right, ripped out is the answer. All right, good answer. By the way, for your reference, Bob, the Frog was levitated in the High Field Magnetic Laboratory in Amsterdam at 16 Tesla. If Bob would like to take a look at the photographs and read about it, I've got a web address here. The most complete account is given in, quote, of Flying Frogs and Levitrons by M.V. Berry and A.K. Geim, European Journal of Physics, version 18, page 307 to 313. That's just for your reference.
I'm really interested in that.
Have you ever, Bob, subjected yourself to regressive hypnosis in hopes of recalling details? Because obviously, even in this program, they're still coming back.
Yeah, I did. In fact, that was one of the first things we did, and it was not, again, so many offbeat stories get started on this information.
Sure.
People said I, was either drugged or hypnotized there at work and couldn't remember anything, or, however the stories go. But there are plenty of them, and they're more than a fair share on the internet. But I initially went to a hypnotist here in town by the name of Lane Keck, specifically one that had heard nothing about flying saucers, alien abductions, or any of the other silly things associated with this, and went specifically to remember intimate details of what I was working with, specifically layouts, schematics, so on and so forth, so I could sit there and, to the absolute best of my ability, draw and record everything that I had seen and done, and that did help out quite a bit. It seemed to,
All right.
And for the record, Art, Bob had a very good memory of all the major things that happened. He's talking about frequencies and quantum behavior and things that he wanted to get into relaxation and try and reread those reports. And but it was nothing like he didn't know he had worked on flying discs and suddenly remembered it under hypnosis. That's not what happened at all.
All right. Well, these are random questions. Bob, somebody asked if the anti-gravity field has to extend all the way to the ground in order for a saucer to fly, or if it has to simply surround the disk itself or the bottom of the disk.
No, it really just has to surround the disk itself. In fact, that's how when I was talking to that other gentleman in Australia,
yes.
That is essentially what we were talking about, that the field produced around the craft is like a torrid, a big donut, essentially. However, with the bottom extended is, the pedestal, the effect of the emitters pointing in that direction. But the field does completely surround the craft.
All right. Here's another one. Please ask Bob if the principles that you've been describing tonight have any relevance in what you've heard of stories with regard to the infamous Philadelphia experiment.
The Philadelphia experiment. A long time ago, when I was at I had heard of the Philadelphia experiment some time ago, and when I was in Los Alamos, they have a classified library there in the library, and I was able to find some general information on the Philadelphia experiment. And in my personal opinion here, that this is a story that has gotten so completely blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there were people injured and people killed in the this test. The aim of the project, apparently, now maybe I was reading false material, but from what I understand, the aim of the project was to make this was the apparent first test of any stealth technology. It was to make an entire ship invisible to radar, not optically invisible.
Right, correct.
And to do this, they were essentially using huge microwave generators, which is essentially what radar is. And,
you bet.
I think the accident that occurred was more along the lines of radiation injuries and things along those lines, not the more sensationalized, we flipped into another dimension.
Continuum,
and
people coming up in the middle of the metal and all.
Yeah, I think there was a much more prosaic explanation for what happened, and in my opinion, and from the small amount of information that I was able to get my hands on, because that had always fascinated me too, as to what happened with that. But I think that's all we're looking at is just an accident along those lines, and the reason for the cover-up, I think, is the same reason for the cover-ups we see around Area 51.
Sure.
Is more of a legal reason because of the injuries involved, just like the toxic waste problem.
You bet.
Out there, than there being something unbelievably top secret.
All right.
Al Bielek won't like that answer.
I know, but that's all right. Art, I'm a computer tech. My training includes understanding electronics, of course. Please ask Bob if he would give us some figures on the toroid that he worked with, perhaps voltages and current. I like to tinker.
The toroid.
Toroid, yeah.
Well, a toroid is a shape.
Well, you were just, that's just the shape of the field. You didn't even work with the toroid, did you?
No, I mean, that's just the shape. I don't understand the question, I guess.
All right, I don't either, so I give up. Have you been approached, or have you agreed to be part of the CSETI program to get a congressional investigation going on all of this? Have you been approached by them?
No, not that I know of or remember.
All right. Please ask Bob. There is a gravity theory out there that says that gravity is RF waves from 1 hertz to past light. Basically, energy doesn't get destroyed, so it must all be out there, billions of waves. The Earth is an RF absorber, so on one side you are pushed to the Earth by the pressure of these RF waves. Do you think the engine you were working with was simply a wideband RF amp, then taking the signal 180 degrees out of phase, canceling any waves coming in, thus making anti-gravity?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I kind of see what he's leaning to. He's relating the gravitational waves to RF waves, and in fact, in some respects, there are some similarities here and there, but it isn't just plain RF.
Okay. A cavity resonator normally bounded by conducting surfaces in which electromagnetic energy may be stored or transmitted as oscillations whose frequency is determined by the size, shape, makeup of the cavity. Do these propulsion systems use this technology in scalar form, waveguide,
continue.
Waveguide form, or modulated FM form against or with gravity?
In waveguide form with gravity, essentially is gravity. This is along the lines of what I was saying, that this behaves very similar to a microwave system. And, we're seeing really a lot of similarities in the construction of the two, the comparison between the reactor waveguides and emitters and microwave systems themselves.
All right. What does Mr. Lazar think of Dr. Michael Wolff? He has in the past supported Mr. Lazar's claims about S4 and the sports model.
Do you remember?
Just refresh me on...
he's the gentleman from back east, I think in Connecticut or somewhere like that, who says... in fact, I think I read that he said that... he was actually a medical doctor working out at S4. Isn't that right, Art?
I vaguely recall that.
Something like that, and essentially concurs with a lot of the things you have to say. But I don't think Bob has ever spoken to him or talked to him, or.
I really don't. I really don't remember his entire story, so I can't really.
And he wrote a book, but we didn't get it.
All right. Lee in Grand Junction, Colorado asks, Bob was being interviewed on a program several years ago where he described seeing a black and white photograph of an alien which had an autopsy performed on it. He said at the time all you could see was one large organ in the chest cavity. If he has seen the video, Alien Autopsy, please ask him if that's what he saw or how the two compare.
No, that isn't what I saw. I don't believe that video is authentic. I believe that's completely fabricated. In one of the briefings I had mentioned, there were two autopsy photographs of the apparent occupants of the craft. They were both cut. One was cut in a T fashion. It was a bust shot, essentially, from the middle of the chest upward. Mm-hmm. The chest was cut in a T fashion. The skin was pulled back, and apparently what was removed from the body was a single large organ, and I said that it most closely resembles a liver. Now, we're dealing with a black and white photograph, so I don't know what color it would be, but it has that almost semi-fluid appearance. There is the other portions of the other photograph had that organ cut itself, and it appeared to have many other chambers, and just from the small amount of information they provided, it seemed to have the function of several organs that we would be familiar with, but essentially evolved or grown together, however you want to look at it.
Wow.
But essentially just one large organ performing the functions of many organs that we're familiar with.
So all you saw, to be clear, were those photographs. You never saw any sort of alien being alive or dead in person?
No, not that.
No.
You know, this story always gets bent out of shape, too.
Well, Bob, this is why I didn't mention Dr. Michael Wolf. Dr. Michael Wolf says, well, you tell the story about walking down the hall. Wolf says he's one of the guys that was standing in that room. That's what he said.
All right. Okay, I will tell the story. Right. Do I think I saw a live alien? No. Am I even sure that those photographs were of an actual alien? No. How could I be? What we're referring to here, Art, is at one time I believe I was walking away from the hangar portion of the installation, mm-hmm. and down this hallway that connected all the other rooms, on a door to my left, there are these 9 or 10-inch square windows on them that have the wires running through them, security windows, if you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
As I was walking down there, I glanced quickly into the room, and what I saw in a quick glance was two other gentlemen in white lab coats,
yes,
facing my way. And then there was a smaller thing, okay, with its back towards the door, looking to them. And this was at a quick glance, and walked by, and immediately, everyone has jumped on it, saying, well, there was a live alien there, so on and so forth. Now, I find it much more plausible to believe that this was a dummy or something, them trying to ascertain the size of whatever creature flew in these crafts. Perhaps they were going to sit it in a seat, see where its arm placements, leg placements would be, so on and so forth. But I have, there's certainly no reason for me to believe that was an actual alien living.
Or that it wasn't.
Well, or that it wasn't. However, you would think that, quite possibly Barry would have said something about that, or I would have been notified.
You're passing the alien room?
Well, or it's something along those lines. I don't think that would have been left out. And, quite frankly, if there were living aliens there, would we be doing a back engineering program like we were? Wouldn't we be receiving some instruction as to how these devices operated? So it's
unless they weren't the aliens that knew that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't believe that was. I believe they had a little dummy there because they were sitting there looking at it like they were trying to size it up as to, is this thing the right size, or so on and so forth.
Anyway, Dr. Michael Wolf alleges that he was one of the men in the white lab coats.
All right.
That's where he fits in that story.
All right. We're going to break here at the bottom of the hour. We'll be right back. Back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Bob, I'm curious, I'm told that you're not going to do many interviews, or perhaps not any, after this one. What's going on?
Well, what happened is actually, believe it or not, there's someone trying to call. Yeah, Gene actually knows more about this than I do.
Well, when they optioned my screenplay, Art, they, Bob's story has been owned by two separate movie studios who, for whatever unknown reason, have not allowed the movie to make it to the screen.
Well, that was basically because of me, because they kept turning down their screenplay.
Yeah, Bob, he gives them freedom in a straitjacket. I mean, he won't allow them to do all the outrageous things they need to do, and so there was long bargaining. This studio wants to get the movie on the screen, and they want Bob to give them his attention, and they want him to be actively involved as a technical consultant on the movie. And Bob never does any interviews anyway, so it wasn't much of a demand. He never goes anywhere, so he agreed to it to give them the impact if they're going to spend tens of millions of dollars to get a realistic portrayal of his movie on the screen. They'd like him to wait and I guess do the rounds when the movie comes out.
Well, so it's a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
I want to thank you both. All right, some very fast technical questions. If you don't know the answers, Bob, just say no. Are gravity waves a broadband or narrowband phenomena? Well,
they're actually a narrowband phenomena, but they're not just a simple electromagnetic wave. It seems to be a complex emission, and that's about all I can say in a short time about them.
All right. What is their frequency or wavelength, or was there a way of measuring that?
Well, there was. It's not really a set, as I said, frequency or wavelength, but there was an apparent... I wish this person would stop trying to...
Yeah, indeed.
There was an apparent carrier wave, and that was, I believe, of extremely low frequency. Not to say that this is the gravitational wave, but it was in the area of 7.46 or 7.2. Do you remember what the exact number was, Gene?
Yeah, 7.46 hertz at a 1 micron bandwidth or something like that.
All right.
Yeah. At almost 3 o'clock in the morning, my IQ drops about 50 points.
Maybe together we could get one answer out of it.
Is gravity radiation coherent?
Yes, it is.
Can you draw a schematic or block diagram of the propulsion system? The answer to that has to be yes. You've done it.
Yes, absolutely.
What level of power is produced during travel? Kilowatts, megawatts, gigawatts, or measurements that we don't have to express?
No, it's gigawatts.
Gigawatts.
I mean, it's a huge, and that's the way the craft runs is the reactor actually operates at its full potential always. The way they, if you want to use the term throttle the power, is they change the phase of the amplifiers themselves, but the reactor is always outputting its maximum. All right,
so that answers my next one, which was what is the duty cycle, peak average power, and duration of output? So it's always at full output.
Right.
Is there?
However, I do have to say that when all three amplifiers are being used for the delta mode of travel, they do not operate continuously. In other words, if the craft was sitting here locally in our local system, you can't make a jump, or you can't distort space from here to 30 light years out. This has to be done in several consecutive jumps, and there is apparently a recycle time, on the system.
And they're pulsed, right?
Yeah, they're pulsed, and again, we're working against the 3 o'clock IQ drop here, but I'm trying to remember. We even calculated the recycle time on them because we wanted to find out what the actual travel time would be, and adding, I can't remember if it's microseconds or milliseconds, but what we'll do in the future is, should we ever get the guys to update our web page, is post some of this information, some more of the technical stuff
that'd be
for
great.
The people that are interested in it.
right, is there a relatively simple antenna detector that one might use with a receiver or spectrum analyzer to capture gravity waves?
No, absolutely not.
What EM effects are produced near an operating saucer?
Oh, dramatic ones. Anything you'd see around a, any sort of electromagnetic pulse, but you see a tremendous electromagnetic disturbance. Actually, you have an optical disturbance too, and
wow.
one that is quite fascinating. If you are directly under the craft, you will only see the sky above it, and here again is what I was describing as the bending of light. This is also a potential fantastic camouflage. Should we be able to duplicate a system like this for military vehicles and what have you, because the way the gravitational field is formed around the craft, the light is bent around it too. So looking up directly at the craft, you
wouldn't
only
see
the sky. To actually see it, you need to step back out of the field. Well,
right.
You're not really in the field, but yeah, if you kind of see what I mean there. There are from certain viewpoints, the craft is completely invisible.
All right. Do gravity waves intermodulate radio or light waves in any way?
Do they intermodulate radio or light waves in any way?
How would you know?
I guess you wouldn't.
Well, I'm trying to guess here how that might happen. Well, I imagine they would, because what you're doing is you're distorting. Well, is that true? I don't know for sure, so I guess I don't want to guess.
That's an answer.
Yeah.
Here's one that I don't understand. You might. Referring to the candle experiment, does the flame continue to radiate heat as well as light when it's frozen? Why or why not?
This is something that still to this day makes absolutely no sense to me, and I saw it, so this has aggravated me and probably will forever. One of the experiments they showed me, if you remember, I mentioned the producing a localized distortion, producing a black dot.
Yes.
What the other experiment Barry performed for me was putting a candle in that space. And what he did was, I really don't recall if he pulsed the emitter at a lower power, a higher power, or it was probably at a lower distortion. But the candle flame continued to emit light, but the flame stopped flickering, as if it was frozen in time.
Ooh, that's weird.
Now, I would believe me, this is quite beyond weird.
Were you close enough to feel heat?
No, and I don't think anyone was brave enough to stick their hand in that general area either. Who knows what it would be like? But the fact is, if there was a localized gravity distortion, obviously there was, and if there was a localized distortion in time, why is there light being emitted? I mean, there's
right.
something here that doesn't make any sense at all, and this has really driven me crazy. And I can't. So, yeah, is there heat emitted? Boy, I would really love to know myself.
Wouldn't it indicate that,
actually,
we don't know as much about photons as we thought we did?
Well, really, we don't know. And when it comes right down to it. But obviously, if we're seeing, photons emitted in our normal optical bandwidth, there's nothing to tell me that they wouldn't be in the infrared bandwidth, which is heat also. So my guess is that there would be heat, but I would certainly love to have that demonstrated to me again and really observe that.
You observed only one propulsion system, correct?
One propulsion system.
In other words, one type.
Right. Well, from what I understood, there was only one type.
All right. Do the saucers have a communication, or did they seem to have any sort of communication system that you could perceive?
No. Again, however, this brings up another point. When I did see one of the craft tests flown, there at one point I was permitted to be inside the hangar. The craft was taken outside. And it was a very unimpressive test. The craft just lifted off the ground and moved around slightly. However,
would have impressed me.
Well, as I've said, that's as unimpressive as a flying saucer test could be. But I mean, as far as it's zooming around and doing all kinds of exotic maneuvers, it didn't do that.
In your opinion, would humans survive in the zooming around mode in these craft?
Absolutely. But my point was that the person was apparently in communication with someone in the craft. Now, from what I was able to see, and I believe I even asked the guy, that he was communicating with him on a normal VHF transmitter around the 200 megahertz bandwidth,
right.
And with the gravitational distortion around it. In fact, this even relates to another question someone else had asked. I would imagine, and with the EMP effects of the craft, I can't understand how they can receive that in the craft too. So there's an awful lot of questions that I would really like to know the answers to, and obviously people ask these questions too.
Sure, the 200 megahertz area would be military frequencies generally. Let's try a couple of questions from the audience. So little time. First time caller line, you're on the air with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, where are you?
I'm calling from Bellingham, Washington.
Yes, sir.
And respects to you, Mr. Bell. Your program is excellent.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Lazar.
Ask.
2 times in my life I've seen... Huh?
Before I fall asleep.
In any of this, did you ever see any sort of strange blue light?
Yes, around the, strange blue light wasn't that strange. When the craft began to lift off the ground, because of the high voltage present on the very bottom of the craft, there was a corona discharge, kind of a brush-like fuzzy blue glow around the bottom, which dissipated when the craft got up to about 30 feet or so, but that was the only, unique blue light.
Color effect that you saw, right. Mm-hmm. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Hello, where are you?
I'm in Oklahoma City.
All right, sir.
And I was listening to the program, and then you was talking about that model.
Yes.
And on that booklet said that when he was inside the craft and he powered it up, one of the panels become, invisible like, and then there was some kind of weird writing on it.
All right, transparent. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that was I was going to touch on that when I had mentioned that all the seats were facing in one direction. Between each archway in the craft, there's obviously the skin of the craft. Mm-hmm. That one archway, that the seats face is apparently unique. Now, I say apparently because the other archways may in fact do this, but I saw no evidence of that. But the one time when I went into the craft, there was another team working in there, and they energized that portion, that archway in the craft, where the skin of the craft became transparent. Now, that's not the most amazing thing. I mean, we have liquid crystals that do that too.
It's true.
In fact, I think the new Buick sunroofs do that. However, this is more metallic than crystalline, so this was certainly another, unique material that can be used as, obviously a transparent, translucent viewport, or some sort of video or whatever their output is, display panel.
All right.
Also, Bob, on what this gentleman was referring to, you said on the right side of the archway was a solid panel and some sort of unknown writing scrolled down that, right?
Right. Well, I related it to writing. It's just the closest thing I said it looked like was Korean. Korean writing. I mean, I'm not very familiar with writing. Do you know what Korean writing looks like? It's mostly lines and little.
Well, it's like Chinese. It's a.
Well, no, not really. Chinese kind of looks Chinese.
All right, I'll take a look at Korean writing.
But that's my closest analogy to it. I'm not saying that it represented it in any way.
I understand. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Hello.
Yeah, good morning. This is Alexander in Central California.
Yes, sir.
I was just curious whether you're able to identify the material that the emitters were hanging off of, as far as elemental sort of thing.
No, we never got to that. That was certainly further down the line, but it was identical, at least apparently to me, to be what the waveguide was also made of, that connected to the reactor. And in fact, removing the reactor, if you grab the waveguide and lift it up, it just collapses in on itself. I mean, there's no visible seams or anything. It just gets smaller. But there's really no way to describe it. We weren't able to perform any tests on it other than just standing there and looking at it in amazement.
All right, listen, I want to give, you guys have been so good, I want to give you an opportunity to plug something or another. You've got a tape, I know. Gene, how do people get, can you still get that tape or not?
Yeah, you can
Well,
still
actually,
get it.
the reason that tape is in existence was so I didn't have to do any interviews. And I used to just give that out to people because I absolutely loathe doing interviews, but we found people were selling it instead.
Yeah. But Art, they can get to your website, to our website, and everything's on there. And then, in fact, we never advertise it or anything. I'll cook up something. We'll give some sort of discount, knock it down for Art Bell listeners if people are interested in buying it. I'll go ahead and discount the tape and the poster on that web page if they mention Art Bell.
All right, but not everybody has a computer, so.
Okay. Well, if you're interested, you could write to Tridot Productions, TRIDOT Productions, 2413 Southeastern Avenue, Suite 225, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89104. And we'll have the girls send you a postcard and give you prices and addresses and places to send money for a tape or poster if you'd like.
Do it again, please.
It's not Southeastern, it's South.
Okay,
Eastern.
It's Tridot Productions, TRIDOT Productions.
Right.
2413 Eastern Avenue, Southeastern Avenue.
Yes.
Suite 225, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89104. And they write, and if they're interested, we'll send them a postcard.
All right. When the screenplay that you are now developing that is going to tell this whole story, Gene, when will this be manifested into something that we can go out and watch at the movies?
Well, I don't think Steven Spielberg could tell you that. The fact is, the first movie deal, literally the president of the studio came to meet Bob and said, I'm going to make this movie.
Do you want to help or not?
Yeah, and 5 years later, that movie's still not on the screen, so I would not be so bold as to give a date, but these people do seem serious, and if they could wave a magic wand, they'd like to have it on the screen in the summer or fall of 1998, but I mean, who knows?
Well, the atmosphere for it now, after the way the genre has been going, has got to be just right.
Well, they say that if a mediocre movie like Men in Black, and we all had hoped Men in Black would be great, but it was kind of mediocre. It did $230 million just here in the United States, so I would say that's more than encouraging.
Bob, are you going to act at all in the movie?
Well, but actually, I don't want them to make the movie.
You don't?
No.
Really? Why not?
Well, you really haven't been.
He's afraid they'll make it outrageous and won't stick to the storyline.
Well,
the problem, Art.
Well, no, it's not.
He's probably right, by the way. They will,
Well, you have to. When you sign a contract for a movie deal, you have to sign, you have to sign away every right. I mean, they could turn it into anything they want. And so Bob gets it close to the vest and restricts what they can portray. They can't portray any live aliens.
I don't know. By the time it's over, you'll have little guys going, yak, 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 yak.
Well, not with my name on it.
Steven Seagal will be fighting them with a machine gun, probably.
Well, it sure has been a pleasure doing this, and we sure did get a lot of good information out.